Nobody ever
The
sat next
Galactic
to Danny
Academy
Reeves in
entrance exam
class.
was a joke.
It was not that he smelled
I mean,
bad or
sure,
said
it
strange
was tough.
things. It was simpler
Logic
than that.
puzzles
He
that would
was
make
human.
a quantum
And
computer
at the Galactic
sweat.
Academy of
Physical
Sciences,
trials designed
humans were
for
considered the
species with 3
universe's
legs
most
and
boring
prehensile
species.
tails.
No telepathy,
And a
no
history
armor
section
scheme,
covering
no
10,000 years of
spines,
star-spanning
no
empires.
ability to breathe
But for
underwater
me,
or
Alex,
see in total
the
darkness.
first and only
Just a
human
soft,
ever admitted,
medium-sized creature
was
from a
just
planet
another
that
Tuesday.
most galactic citizens
My
avoided
classmates, however,
because it was
didn't see it that
classified
way.
as a Category
They saw
7
me as a
death
primitive,
world. Danny did
a
not mind
soft-skinned
the empty
bipedal
seats.
oddity from
He had
some
spent 3
backwater
years
planet
as
in
a
the
park ranger in
uncharted zones.
Montana before
They
earning a
called my home
scholarship to
Terra,
the academy.
but the
And
official
solitude
designation in the
was
star
something
charts
he
was
understood.
much more
He
dramatic.
sat in the back row
Planet
of Professor
DH7,
Galani's comparative
a
species
Class
studies
12
lecture,
death world.
took careful notes,
They didn't
and
know
kept his
what
mouth
that
shut.
meant.
Professor
They thought it
Galani
was
was a
just a label.
Mavori, a
To them,
six-legged
I was
reptilian
fragile,
elder with deep
weak
green
silent,
scales and
a
a voice
hulking
like
Cathar
gravel
with rock-like
rolling
skin.
downhill. He had been
Once
teaching
offered
at the
to carry my
academy
books,
for
afraid I'd
40
strain
years,
something.
and
A
very
little
little
condescending,
surprised him
but he
anymore.
meant well.
Today he was covering
Lyra, a
survival
slender forearmed
classifications,
silent,
the
would
system the
always
Galactic
translate
Council
complex
used to
concepts
rank
into
every
simpler
known
terms for
species
me,
based on their
assuming I
homeworld's
couldn't keep
danger
up.
level and their
I never
biological
corrected
tools
them.
for staying alive.
What was the point?
We will begin with the Fenari, Galani said, tapping the display board. A holographic image of a tall, thin,
My
blue-skinned figure
childhood
appeared.
wasn't about learning to
Homeworld
pilot a graph
classification,
skimmer. It was
Category
about
2,
learning which berries
mild
wouldn't
climate,
kill you,
no natural
how to
predators
outrun
for the
things that
last
saw you as
8,000
lunch,
years.
and knowing
Biological
the difference between a
advantages
thunderstorm
include
and a
4
Category 5
prehensile
hurricane.
arms,
The
enhanced
day
peripheral
everything
vision,
changed
and
was
a
during our
regenerative nervous
compulsory
system.
survival training.
Roly, the only
The
Fenari in
exercise
the
was simple.
class,
Get
leaned
dropped
back in
on a
his seat with a
supposedly hostile
satisfied grin.
own,
His
and make it to the
translucent
extraction
blue skin
point 20
shimmered under the
kilometers
lecture
away.
hall lights.
The
He
moon
was tall,
Zelos was considered
confident,
a Class
and
4
absolutely
challenge.
certain that he was the most
Dangerous
capable
fauna,
being
unpredictable
in any room
weather,
he entered.
treacherous
Galani
terrain.
moved through
For my
several
classmates,
more species.
it was the ultimate
the
test.
Drathy,
For
small
me,
and
it
furry,
felt like a camping
from
trip.
underground cities with perfect
Things went
climate
wrong
control.
almost
The
immediately.
Halani,
A freak
graceful
magnetic storm
insectoids
knocked
with
out all our
iridescent
tech.
wings who had mastered
Comes
their entire
navigation,
planetary
everything.
ecosystem through
We were
biotechnology.
blind.
Each
Panic
species had
started to set
impressive
in.
biological advantages.
Zealer, the
Each
big tough
homeworld
guy,
was comfortable
breathing
and
heavily.
manageable.
His
Then
eyes
Galani
darting into the
reached
growing
humans.
shadows.
Earth, he said.
Lyra was trying
Category
to recalibrate
7.
her dead
The
nave
room
unit.
went quiet for
Her
exactly
extra
2
hands
seconds.
trembling.
Then someone in the middle
The
row
air was
whispered,
getting thin,
7,
and the temperature was
murmuring
dropping
started.
fast.
Category
We're lost.
7
A
meant the
smaller
planet was
reptilian
actively
student
hostile
hissed.
to its own
The
inhabitants.
predators will find
Extreme
us before
weather,
morning.
tectonic instability,
That's when I stepped
predators on every
The
continent,
fear in the air was
toxic
familiar.
plants,
A scent
venomous
I'd grown
creatures
up
in the
with.
oceans,
I
forests,
took a deep breath
deserts,
of the alien
and
air,
sometimes
tasting the
hiding
moisture,
inside
the
shoes.
metallic temps
Now,
of the soil.
Galani continued.
I looked at the twin
Let us examine
suns
the
setting on the
biological
horizon,
tools humans
noted their
developed to
position.
survive this environment.
I crumbled a
He
piece
pulled
of
up
the
a
local
list.
rock in my
The
hand,
class read it in
feeling its
silence.
texture,
No
its density.
clothes, no
The
venom,
extraction
no
point
natural
is that
armor,
way, I
no
said,
sonar, no
pointing towards a
echolocation,
jagged
no
mountain range.
regeneration. Average
We
speed,
need to find shelter
average
before
strength,
the temperature
below
drops
average
below
senses
freezing.
compared to
There's
most
a cave
galactic
system in those
species.
hills. I
Thin
can smell
skin
the water.
that could be punctured by thorns.
They all stared at
Roly
me.
broke the
Zyler
silence with a
scoffed.
laugh that echoed
And how would a
off the
primitive
walls.
know that?
How are they not extinct?
Your
The
senses
class
are
erupted.
dull compared to
Even
ours.
Sun, the quiet
just
Drathy
smiled.
student with
My
soft
senses
gray
are
fur
fine.
and careful eyes,
Where I come from,
let out a
you
small
learn to
chuckle.
pay attention
Bree,
or you don't live
a
long.
Halani with shimmering
Now,
wings
are you
folded
coming?
neatly
Or
behind
do you
her
want to
back.
be a Xylotian
Covered her mouth
predator's
politely,
midnight snack?
but her shoulders shook with
Hesitantly,
laughter.
they followed.
Perhaps they asked the
I led
predators
them through the
nicely
darkening
to
landscape,
leave them alone.
my body
Roly
on high
said.
alert.
Louder now.
I pointed out the
playing to
almost
the crowd.
invisible tripwires.
Please, Mr. Bear, do
identified
not
the
eat me.
edible-looking fungus
I have no
that
claws,
was actually
but
a
I have
neurotoxin.
feelings. More
And
laughter.
found a clear path
Danny,
through a
in the back
razor rock
row,
field
smiled
that would have
slightly.
shredded their feet.
He kept writing his notes.
I wasn't using
Galani
any
let the
advanced tech.
laughter die on its own.
I was
He did
using
not correct
skills honed by
anyone.
millions of
He simply
years of
moved on.
evolution on
Your
the
survival
deadliest
practicum
playground
begins
in the
in
galaxy.
3 days.
We
he
found the
announced.
cave
The
just
room
as a
groaned.
sleet storm hit.
5 standard days
I
on
started
the
a
wilderness
fire
moon
using a
of
friction
Varith
technique
4.
that left them
Teams of 4.
speechless.
Minimal supplies.
While they huddled for
no
warmth,
communication
I went
devices
back out
beyond
into the storm.
emergency beacons.
I returned
This
a while
exercise
later,
counts
dragging
for
the
half
carcass
your
of a
final grade.
six-legged creature
Roly
that had
cracked
tried
his
to ambush
four-knuckle
me
fingers.
near the cave entrance.
My team will finish in
They
2
looked at me,
days, he declared.
covered in alien
He pointed
blood,
at Sun and
calmly
Bree.
sharpening a
You
rock
too,
to butcher the
with me.
animal.
Sun nodded.
And for the first
Bree
time,
agreed
I
with
saw
a
a new
graceful
kind of
tilt
look
of her
in
head.
their eyes.
Your fourth
It
member,
wasn't pity
Galani
or
said,
condescension.
checking his display,
It was respect.
has been randomly
and maybe
assigned.
just a
He
little
paused.
bit of fear.
Danny Reeves.
That night,
Rolly's
huddled around the
face
fire,
felt like a
eating
stone
roasted
dropped
meat.
from orbit.
They started
human.
asking questions.
The human,
Not about
Galani
my
confirmed.
grades, but about
Rolly
my
turned
home,
around and
they
looked at
finally
Danny
understood.
as if he had just been
Being
told to
from a
carry a
death
sack of
world
rocks
wasn't
across
a
a mountain.
handicap.
Sun
Was a
shrugged,
secret weapon.
indifferent. Bree
My
offered a
instinct,
small,
my
polite
resilience,
smile that
my
clearly said she
unbreakable
was
will to
sorry about the
survive these
situation.
were things
Danny
that
closed
couldn't
his
be taught
notebook
in a
and nodded.
classroom.
I will meet you
They
all
were
at the
forged
shuttle.
in the crucible
That
of
was
Earth,
it. No
the
argument.
quiet,
No defensiveness.
unassuming planet
No
that
attempt to
created the
prove
galaxy's
himself.
most
He
dangerous
simply packed
predator.
his things
A
and stood up.
human who knows
The
how to
class
survive.
filed out, buzzing
The
with
academy was
excitement
just the
and
beginning.
complaints about the practicum.
They thought
Rolly
they were
loudly
teaching me.
told anyone who would
In
listen that
reality,
his team
I was
would have been
about to teach
perfect
them.
if not for
Thanks
the
for
dead weight.
watching.
Danny
If you
walked
enjoyed
toward
this
the
story,
exit,
make sure to hit
unhurried.
that like button
Professor
and
Galani's
subscribe for
voice
more
caught him at
tales
the
from
door.
the stars.
Reeves.
See you next
Danny
time.
stopped and turned. The old Mavori looked at him with eyes that held decades of quiet observation. Be careful out there. Danny adjusted the strap of his bag on his shoulder. Careful is all I know how to be, Professor. Galani watched him go. Then, alone in the empty lecture hall, the professor looked at the survival classification chart still glowing on the display board. Earth, Category 7. He had visited that planet once, 20 years ago. He had stood in a forest in a place humans called Alaska and listened to the wind and the distant sound of wolves. He had never been more terrified in his life. He switched off the display and walked out, saying nothing to anyone. The shuttle shook like a tin can in a hailstorm as it punched through the atmosphere of Varith 4. Danny sat with his harness pulled tight, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady. Across from him, Rolly gripped the armrest with all four hands, his blue skin flickering a shade paler than normal. Sun had curled into a tight ball of gray fur, and Bree's wings were pressed flat against her back, trembling with each jolt. The pilot's voice crackled through the speaker. Team 7, your drop zone is Highland Sector 9. Dense forest, river system to the east, rocky terrain to the north. Weather forecast shows a storm system arriving in approximately 40 hours. Good luck. The shuttle doors opened, and they stepped out onto the surface of a world that did not care whether they lived or died. Varith 4 was beautiful in the way a predator was beautiful. Towering alien trees with bark the color of rust stretched toward a pale green sky. The air was thick with moisture and the smell of something sweet and rotting. Insects the size of fists drifted between the branches, their wings catching light that filtered through the dense canopy above. Rolly straightened up immediately and declared himself team leader. Nobody argued, mostly because nobody cared enough to fight about it. The extraction point is 30 kilometers northwest, Rolly announced, studying the basic map they had been given. We move fast, cover as much ground as possible today, and finish this practicum in 3 days instead of 5. Danny looked at the sky, then at the ground, then at the trees. He crouched and touched the soil. He watched which direction the insects were moving. We should secure water first, Danny said quietly. Scout the terrain. Build a shelter before dark. Rolly stared at him. Shelter? We're not camping for fun, human. We are completing an objective. The storm is coming sooner than 40 hours, Danny said. The insects are already moving to higher ground. Rolly waved 2 of his hands dismissively. Insects, you want us to make survival decisions based on bugs. He turned and started walking northwest. Bree gave Danny an apologetic look and followed, her wings giving her short, gliding hops over the rough terrain. Sun hesitated, glanced at Danny, then shuffled after the group. Danny picked up his pack and followed. By midday, the problem started. Rolly's 4 arms were excellent for climbing and manipulating objects, but his species had evolved on flat, temperate plains. The rocky, uneven ground of Varith 4 punished his thin legs with every step. He stumbled constantly, but refused to slow down. Sun was worse. The Drothi had spent their entire evolutionary history underground. His short legs were built for smooth tunnel floors, not tangled roots and loose stones. His feet were bleeding within 3 hours, though he said nothing about it. Bree fared better at first, using her wings to hop and glide over obstacles. But the alien pollen coating every surface stuck to her wings like glue, and by afternoon, she could barely lift herself off the ground. She walked in silence, her iridescent wings heavy and dull. Danny walked at the back. He had not complained once. He had not stumbled once. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the tree line, the ground, the sky, the shadows between the trunks. He noted edible-looking plants. He tracked the direction of the river by the slope of the terrain and the sound of running water just barely audible through the forest. When Rolly finally stopped and sat down on a rock, too tired to pretend otherwise, Danny spoke. There's a clearing about 200 meters east near the river, sheltered on three sides by rock formations. Good place to camp. Rolly opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He was breathing too hard. They followed Danny to the clearing. It was exactly as he described. A natural alcove formed by large boulders with a flat, dry area of ground and a clear view of the river about 50 meters below. Danny dropped his pack and went to work. He gathered broad alien leaves and tested their strength by pulling them. He selected flexible branches and bent them into a frame. Within an hour, he had constructed a lean-to shelter large enough for all four of them, angled to block the prevailing wind. Rolly watched from the rock where he sat. Where did you learn to do that? Danny did not look up. Home. He tested the river water with the basic purification kit from their supplies. He collected extra water in containers fashioned from large curled leaves sealed with sticky sap from a nearby tree. Then he gathered dry material from beneath the rocks where moisture had not reached and started building a fire. Rolly laughed, but it was a tired, hollow sound. You're going to rub sticks together? Danny did not answer. He selected two pieces of wood, one hard and one soft, and used a technique he had adapted within minutes to the local materials. Friction, heat, smoke. A tiny ember caught in a nest of dry fibers. He blew on it gently, patiently, and a flame rose. The fire crackled to life in the fading light of Varith IV's short day. Nobody laughed. They ate their ration packs in silence around the fire. The forest sounds grew louder as darkness fell. Strange calls and rustling movements in the undergrowth that made Sun's fur stand on end and Bree's wings twitch involuntarily. Danny sat calmly, feeding small sticks into the fire, keeping it steady. After a long silence, Sun spoke. His voice was quiet, almost shy. Danny, where did you really learn all of this? Danny looked at the fire. I grew up in Montana. That is a place on Earth. Mountains, forests, rivers. The weather there can kill you in an hour if you're not paying attention. I was a park ranger for 3 years before I came here. Sun was quiet for a moment. Then he said, On my world, we have not been outside in thousands of years. Everything is controlled. Temperature, humidity, light. Danny nodded. That sounds comfortable. It is, Sun said. He looked at the fire, then at the dark forest surrounding them. But I'm starting to think comfortable and safe are not the same thing. Nobody said anything after that. Danny stayed awake long after the others fell asleep, watching the tree line and listening to a world that was wild and indifferent and alive in every direction. He had never felt more at home. The birds stopped singing at dawn. Danny noticed it first because Danny noticed everything. He had been awake for 20 minutes already, sitting at the edge of the shelter, watching the forest with the quiet patience of someone who had learned long ago that nature always gives warnings. You just have to know how to listen. The air was heavy, not humid the way yesterday had been, but thick, pressurized like the sky was holding its breath. The insects that had swarmed around them all night were gone. The small burrowing creatures he had seen poking out of holes near the river had disappeared underground. Even the constant rustle of alien leaves had gone still. Danny stood and looked at the sky through a gap in the canopy. The pale green had turned a deep, bruised gray. Get up, he said. Now. Rolly groaned from inside the shelter. It is barely light out. What is the urgency? Storm, Danny said, and it is coming faster than they predicted. Sun emerged, his gray fur matted on one side from sleeping on the ground. He sniffed the air, and his ears went flat against his head. Even with no wilderness experience, something ancient in his biology recognized the danger. His body knew what his mind did not. Bree crawled out carefully, favoring her strained wings. She looked at the sky, and her antennae twitched rapidly. The atmosphere pressure has dropped significantly, she said. I can feel it in my wing membranes. So it rains, Rolly said, finally emerging. We push through it. Rain does not stop the Fenari. Danny was already reinforcing the shelter. He layered additional leaves over the frame, added support braces to the sides, and wove flexible branches through the structure to make it more resistant to wind. He worked fast, but without panic. "This is not rain," Danny said. "Listen to the forest. Everything alive on this moon is hiding. When the animals hide, you hide. Roliesyav tightened. We are wasting time. Every hour we sit here is an hour we fall behind other teams. I say we move." Danny stopped working and looked at him. Not with anger, not with frustration, just a calm, steady look that said he had seen this kind of stubbornness before, in people standing at trailheads in Montana ignoring storm warnings because they did not want to lose a day of hiking. Moving through dense forest during a high wind storm means falling trees, zero visibility, and flooding near the river, Danny said. "If we get caught in the open, we die. That is not dramatic. That is physics." Rolly stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked into the forest. "Rolly," Bree called. "I am scouting ahead," he shouted back without turning around. 15 minutes. Then we move." Bree looked at Danny with something close to fear in her compound eyes. Danny said nothing. He finished reinforcing the shelter, moved their supplies to the highest ground in the clearing, and dug a shallow drainage trench around the campsite with a flat rock. Then he followed Rolly into the forest. He found all three of them half a kilometer ahead. Rolly was marching, Bree was struggling to keep up on foot, and Sun was limping on his raw, bandaged feet. Danny fell in behind them without a word. The storm hit 40 minutes later. It did not build gradually. It arrived like a wall. One moment the air was still and gray. The next, the wind screamed through the canopy with a sound like tearing metal. Rain came down not in drops, but in solid sheets of water that hit the ground hard enough to splash mud waist-high. Rolly stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the trail with rain hammering his thin body and wind pulling at his forearms. And for the first time since Danny had known him, the Fenari looked small. A tree cracked somewhere to their left. The sound was enormous, a deep groan followed by an explosion of splintering wood. It crashed through the canopy and slammed into the ground 20 meters from where Bree was standing. She screamed, a high-pitched sound that cut through the wind, and stumbled backward. Danny was already moving. "Follow me," he said, not shouting, not commanding, just saying it with absolute certainty, the way you speak when there is no room for doubt. He had spotted a rocky outcrop during yesterday's march. 30 meters to the east, slightly uphill. He had filed it away in his memory the way he filed away every potentially useful feature of the landscape, automatically, without thinking about it, the way his species had done for 200,000 years. He led them to the rocks. The outcrop formed a natural windbreak, a shallow overhang with solid stone on three sides. Danny positioned them against the back wall and pulled the emergency thermal sheets from their kit. He stretched them across the opening, weighting the edges with stones, creating a crude but effective rain barrier. The wind howled. Rain battered the thermal sheets. Another tree went down somewhere nearby with a crash that shook the ground. Bree was shaking. Her wings had been caught by a gust during the run, and one was badly strained, bent at an angle that made Danny wince. She could not fold it properly. She sat with it extended, trembling, rain dripping from its damaged edge. Danny knelt beside her. "Let me see." She flinched but let him examine the wing. It was not broken, but the joint was inflamed and the membrane had several small tears from being battered against branches. Danny carefully wrapped the wing using strips torn from his own jacket. He worked gently, his rough hands surprisingly precise. "It will heal," he told her. "The membrane will close on its own. Just keep it still." Bree looked at him. "You have treated wing injuries before?" "No," Danny admitted. "But I have treated a lot of sprains and tears in connective tissue. Same principles." The storm raged through the night. Danny did not sleep. He adjusted the thermal barrier when the wind shifted direction. He checked the ground for water seepage when the rain intensified. He kept the others talking when the sounds outside grew frightening, telling them about Montana winters and how the snow could bury a cabin in a single night. Sun listened with wide eyes. Rolly listened in silence. When dawn finally came and the storm began to ease, the world outside was wrecked. Trees down everywhere. The ground turned to mud. The river, visible in the distance, had swollen to 3 times its normal width. Rolly looked at Danny. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked away. Sun said it for him. You saved our lives. Danny was already packing up the thermal sheets. We should eat something and move while the weather holds. The ground will be unstable. We need to pick a new route. He slung his pack over his shoulder and stepped out into the battered, dripping forest. Behind him, Rolly followed without a single word of complaint. The forest after the storm looked like a battlefield where both sides had lost. Trees lay across the ground in every direction, their roots ripped from the mud like broken teeth. Pools of dark water filled every low spot. The air smelled of crushed vegetation and wet earth and something sharp and chemical that came from split alien bark releasing its sap into the open air. Somewhere far away, something large was calling out in a low, repeating moan that echoed through the wrecked canopy. Danny led them through it all. He moved carefully but steadily, choosing each step with a focus that the others were only now beginning to understand was not caution born from fear. It was caution born from experience. He tested the ground before putting his full weight down. He checked overhanging branches before walking beneath them. He kept them on high ground whenever possible, routing around flooded areas that could hide sinkholes or submerged debris. Bree walked beside Sun, her damaged wing wrapped and held against her body. She could not glide or fly, so she picked her way through the wreckage on foot, using her long fingers to balance on fallen trunks. Sun stayed close to her, his short legs struggling, but his determination visible in the set of his jaw. Rolly walked behind Danny. He had not spoken much since the storm. The confidence that had defined him since the first day of class was still there, somewhere underneath, but it had been rearranged. He watched Danny navigate and said nothing, but his eyes were paying attention in a way they had not before. By midday, Sun broke the silence. Danny, how do you remember where everything is? You saw this terrain once before the storm changed it completely, and you still know where we are. Danny did not slow down. Pattern recognition. Humans evolved as long-distance travelers. We migrated across entire continents on foot, following herds, finding water, reading landscapes. Remembering terrain was how we survived. You remember the shape of a ridge, even when the trees on it have changed. You remember where the ground slopes toward water, even when the water has moved. Sun processed this. Your species memorized entire landscapes without technology. For about 200,000 years, yes. Before we had maps, we were maps. Bree made a soft clicking sound with her mandibles, which Danny had learned was the Halani equivalent of being impressed. In the early afternoon, they found the creature. It was lying in a collapsed section of forest where several large trees had fallen together, creating a jumbled pile of trunks and branches. The creature was feeding on the carcasses of smaller animals that had been killed in the storm. It was enormous. 6 legs, each as thick as Danny's torso. An armored back covered in overlapping plates the color of wet stone. Its head was low to the ground, and when it lifted it to sniff the air, Danny could see bioluminescent eyes that glowed a faint, cold blue. It was roughly the size of a grizzly bear. Danny stopped walking and held up one hand. The others froze. Rolly's breath caught. Every instinct in his Fenari body was screaming at him to run. His species had eliminated predators from their world so long ago that they had no learned response to danger, only raw, unprocessed terror. His forehand was shaking. Bree went completely still, her insectoid survival instinct locking every joint in her body. Sun backed up one step, his fur standing on end. "Do not move," Danny whispered. "Do not run. It is going to charge," Rolly hissed. "No, it is feeding. Look at its posture. Head low, shoulders relaxed, weight distributed evenly. It knows we are here. It looked at us and went back to eating. That means it is not hungry enough to bother with us. Right now, we are not food. We are an inconvenience." "How can you possibly know that?" Rolly whispered. "Because I grew up around bears." Danny began giving instructions in a low, steady voice that carried absolute calm. "We are going to back away slowly. Not directly backward. Angle to the left, toward the tree line. Keep facing the creature. Do not turn your back on it. Move smoothly. No sudden gestures. Bree, fold your good wing tight. The shimmer might attract its attention. Sun, keep your fur flat if you can. They moved, one step at a time. The creature raised its head once more and watched them with those glowing blue eyes. Danny held its gaze, not as a challenge, but as an acknowledgement. I see you. You see me. We are both going to walk away from this. 10 minutes. 10 agonizing, silent minutes of careful backward steps through mud and over fallen branches, every second expecting that massive body to launch itself at them. It never did. The creature lowered its head and went back to feeding. When they reached the tree line and put solid distance between themselves and the clearing, Rolly let out a breath, so long it seemed like he'd been holding it since birth. His 4 hands were still trembling. How did you know it would not attack? He asked. Danny leaned against a tree. I did not know for certain. You never know for certain with a predator, but you learn to read them. On Earth, humans share their world with animals that can kill them easily. Bears, tigers, wolves, crocodiles, things with claws and teeth and speed we cannot match. We cannot outfight them. We cannot outrun them. So we learn to understand them. We watch them for thousands of generations until reading a predator became as natural as reading a face. The group was quiet. Sun sat down heavily on a log. He stared at the ground for a long time. Then he said something that surprised everyone. My species removed all predators from our world 10,000 years ago. Every dangerous creature was eliminated or relocated. We made our planet perfectly safe. He paused. We forgot what it means to be part of food chain. We forgot what it feels like to be prey. I think we lost something important when we did that. Nobody argued with him. That evening, Danny set up camp on high ground with clear sight lines in every direction. He built a small fire and cooked the remaining ration packs with heated river water to make them easier to eat. Rolly sat down next to him, not across the fire. Next to him. I owe you an apology, Rolly said. Not just for today, for the classroom, for the jokes. Danny shrugged. No offense taken. It was not jokes, Rolly said, staring at the fire. It was ignorance. I laughed at your species because I looked at a list of biological traits and saw nothing impressive. I did not understand that the most dangerous thing about humans is not what you have. It is what you know. Danny handed him a warm ration pack. Eat. We have a long day tomorrow. Rolly took it, and for the first time, he looked at Danny not as deadweight, but as the reason he was still alive. They heard the river before they saw it, and what they heard was wrong. It should have been the gentle sound of flowing water that they had camped beside on the first night. Instead, it was a roar. Deep, constant, and angry, like the planet itself was grinding its teeth. Danny pushed through the last wall of broken vegetation and stopped at the edge of a cliff that had not been there 2 days ago. The storm had ripped away the bank, exposing raw rock and mud. And below them, the river that had once been a calm, crossable stream was now a churning, brown flood carrying entire trees in its current. Rolly came up beside him and looked down. He said nothing for a full 10 seconds. The extraction point is on the other side, he finally said. Yes. Can we go around? Danny studied the terrain in both directions. The river curved in a wide arc that would add at least 2 full days of walking to reach a crossing point, and they did not have 2 days of supplies left. Going upstream was worse. The valley narrowed into a canyon where the flood water was even more violent. No, Danny said. We cross here, or we activate the emergency beacon and fail the practicum. Rolly looked at the beacon clipped to his belt. For a moment, Danny thought he might reach for it. But something had changed in the Fenari over the past 3 days. Something behind his eyes had hardened in a way that had nothing to do with arrogance. Tell me what to do, Rolly said. Danny scouted along the riverbank for an hour. The others rested, which they needed badly. Bree's wing was healing, but still useless. Sun's feet were wrapped in makeshift bandages that Danny changed twice a day. Rolly was running on determination and nothing else. Danny found what he was looking for a quarter-kilometer downstream. A massive tree had fallen across the river during the storm, its trunk spanning most of the gap. It had lodged against rocks on the far side, creating an unsteady but possible bridge. The gap between the end of the trunk and the far bank was about 3 meters, bridgeable if he could extend the structure. He came back and explained the plan. Nobody argued. Nobody suggested an alternative. They simply picked up their packs and followed him. Danny worked for 2 hours. He dragged fallen branches to the crossing point, some so heavy that Sun had to help him pull them through the mud. He lashed them to the main trunk using vine-like plants that grew along the riverbank, twisting them into ropes that he tested by hanging his full weight from them before trusting them with someone's life. He extended the bridge across the final gap using 2 long branches laid side by side and lashed together, then reinforced them with crosspieces to create a narrow but walkable surface. Bree helped where she could, holding materials steady with her 4-fingered hands while Danny tied knots. Her grip was surprisingly strong, and she worked without complaint, her damaged wing tucked carefully against her body. Rolly carried the heaviest logs without being asked. He did not have Danny's knowledge, but he had 4 arms and a body that was learning to do things it had never been designed for. Sun mixed a quick-setting mud paste from riverbank clay and applied it to the joints of the bridge where the lashing met the trunk, adding stability. He had learned it from watching Danny waterproof the shelter on the first night. For the first time in 4 days, they worked as a team. Not because Danny told them to, because they wanted to. Danny crossed first. He walked out onto the trunk with his arms slightly extended for balance, feeling each step before committing to it. The trunk was slick with spray from the river below. The water was so loud this close that he could not hear anything else. He could feel the vibration of the current through the wood under his feet. He reached the extended section and tested it. It flexed but held. He crossed to the far bank and turned around. One at a time, he called across. Bree first. Lightest weight. Bree stepped onto the trunk. She moved slowly, her long insectoid legs finding surprisingly good grip on the rough bark. Danny talked her across from the far side, calm and steady, telling her exactly where to step. She made it without incident and stood beside him, breathing hard but safe. Rolly went next. His 4 arms gave him an advantage, grabbing the vine handholds Danny had installed along the trunk. He moved awkwardly but steadily, his thin legs wobbling on the narrow surface. Halfway across, he looked down at the churning water and froze. Rolly, Danny called. Look at me. Not the water. Me. Rolly looked up. Danny held his gaze across the gap, steady and unblinking. Rolly took a breath and kept moving. He reached the far side and grabbed Danny's extended hand with 2 of his own. Sun went last. He was the heaviest and the least stable on his short legs. He moved carefully, gripping the vine ropes with both hands. He was doing well until he reached the extended section. The branch shifted under his weight. His right foot slipped. He went down hard on one knee, and the current grabbed his trailing leg like a hand reaching up from below. He started to slide. Danny was on the bridge before anyone could speak. He lunged forward, dropped to his stomach on the wet wood, and grabbed Sun's harness with both hands. The current pulled. Danny pulled harder. A jagged branch sticking out from the lashing ripped across Danny's forearm as he hauled Sun up and onto the bridge. For 3 seconds, it was just muscle against water. A human body, soft and clawless and unremarkable on paper, refusing to let go. Danny dragged Sun to the bank. They collapsed in the mud together, both breathing hard, both alive. Rolly and Bree pulled him up. Sun was shaking but unhurt. Danny stood, wiped mud from his face, and said, "We should keep moving." Bree noticed the blood first. It was running down Danny's left arm in a steady stream, soaking through his torn sleeve. The cut from the jagged branch was deep, running from his elbow to his wrist. "Sit down," Bree said, and for the first time, her voice carried the same quiet authority that Danny's always had. Danny sat. Bree cleaned the wound with purified water and wrapped it tightly with strips from the medical kit. As she worked, she saw his arms up close for the first time. Both forearms were covered in old scars. Thin white lines from thorns and wire. A ragged mark near his wrist from something that had clearly required stitches. Calluses on every finger. Rough, weathered skin on hands that had been working outdoors since childhood. These were not the arms of a weak species. These were the arms of someone who had been getting hurt and getting back up for his entire life. That night, within sight of the extraction point's signal beacon blinking on a distant hill, they sat around Danny's fire one last time. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Rolly said, "I am glad you were on our team." Sun nodded. "I would have died at that river." Bree looked at Danny's bandaged arm and then at his face. "When we get back to the academy," she said, "I want you to teach me how to build a fire." Danny smiled. It was the most any of them had ever seen him smile. "Deal," he said. For students walked out of the forest on the morning of the 5th day, and only one of them was the same person who had walked in. Danny Reeves looked exactly the way he had looked on day one. A little dirtier, a bandage on his left arm, mud on his boots, but the same calm, unhurried walk. The same quiet eyes that watched everything and said very little. The wilderness had not changed him because it had never been foreign to him. The other three were different. Rolly walked without his usual swagger. His 4 arms hung loose at his sides instead of gesturing dramatically. His translucent blue skin was scratched and smeared with dirt, and he did not seem to care. He walked beside Danny instead of in front of him, and anyone paying attention would notice that his stride had unconsciously matched the human steady pace. Sun limped slightly on his bandaged feet, but he held his head up. His gray fur was matted and tangled, but his eyes were clear and focused in a way they had not been in the classroom. He looked like someone who had discovered a part of himself that his comfortable underground world had never required. Bree moved carefully, her damaged wings still wrapped against her body, but she walked with a quiet confidence that was new. She had spent her life on a world where every variable was controlled. For 5 days, nothing had been controlled, and she had survived. The extraction shuttle was already on the ground when they arrived. Other teams were gathered in loose groups nearby. Some looked pristine, dropped in gentle zones with mild weather and no predators. They chatted and laughed as if the practicum had been a vacation. A few teams looked rougher, muddy and tired, but intact. One team was notably absent. They had activated their emergency beacon on day 2 and been pulled out. Danny's team sat together on a flat rock near the landing pad and waited. Nobody from the other groups approached them. The state of their clothes and the look in their eyes said enough. On the shuttle back to the academy, Danny sat in the back row. He leaned his head against the wall, closed his eyes, and slept for the first time in what Rolly realized must have been nearly 2 days. The human had stayed awake through the storm, through the predator encounter, through the river crossing, through the final march. He had not mentioned it. He had not complained. He had simply stayed awake because the team needed someone watching. Rolly stared at the sleeping human for a long time and felt something he had never felt before in his life. It was not admiration, though that was part of it. It was shame. Not the painful kind that eats at you, but the useful kind that makes you want to be better. Back at the academy, Professor Galani conducted debriefings in the main lecture hall. Each team presented their experience. The easy teams gave short, cheerful reports. The harder zones produced longer stories with more nervous laughter. When it was time for Team 7, Rolly stood up. Danny opened his mouth as if to say something, maybe to offer to speak or to suggest they keep it brief. But Rolly was already talking. He told the class everything. He told them about dismissing Danny's advice on the first day and marching until their feet bled. He told them about Danny building the shelter that kept them alive through the night. He told them about ignoring the storm warnings and nearly getting killed by a falling tree. He told them about Danny leading them to safety in a hurricane without raising his voice once. He told them about the predator, about standing 20 meters from a creature that could have torn them apart, and watching a human, a soft, clawless, fangless human, read its body language and walk them out of danger using nothing but knowledge passed down through 200,000 years of living alongside things that could kill you. He told them about the river, about Danny building a bridge with his bare hands, about Danny diving onto a wet log to grab Sun before the current took him, about the blood running down Danny's arm, and Danny saying they should keep moving as if it were nothing. Rolly did not exaggerate. He did not dramatize. He told the truth, and the truth was enough. The lecture hall was completely silent. Professor Galani let the silence hold for a long moment. Then he walked to the display board and pulled up the survival classification chart from the first lecture. Earth, Category 7. The same chart that had made the class laugh. The danger rating of a homeworld, Galani said slowly, does not measure the weakness of its inhabitants. It measures what they had to overcome. He looked across the rows of students. Every eye was on him. Species that survive death worlds do not do it with claws or armor or venom. Those are shortcuts, biological gifts. They require no effort, no learning, no adaptation. What death world species develop is something far more difficult to quantify. Persistence, awareness, adaptability, the ability to cooperate under pressure, and above all, the refusal to stop trying. He looked at Danny, who was sitting in his usual spot in the back row, clearly wishing the attention would end. Humans have no single outstanding biological trait. They're not the strongest, the fastest, the toughest, or the most perceptive species in this galaxy. But they have every trait just enough, combined with a mind that never stops solving problems and a body that simply will not quit. That is why a soft, clawless, fangless species from a world that actively tries to kill them is now sitting among you. Danny gave a small, uncomfortable nod. That was all. The class did not applaud. Applause would have felt wrong. Instead, something shifted. It was invisible but real, like the change in air pressure before a storm. The way the room looked at Danny was different now. Not with fear, not with awe, with respect. After class, the hallway felt changed. Students who had walked past Danny for months without a glance now acknowledged him. A Finari from another section gave him a nod. A group of Drothi stepped aside to let him pass, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Rolly caught up to him at the cafeteria entrance. Food! Danny shrugged. Sure. Sun was already inside, saving a table. Bree arrived a minute later, her wing half unwrapped now and showing signs of healing. They sat together, eating alien food that tasted strange and wonderful, talking about their next class like any other group of students. Like friends. 2 weeks later, a new batch of exchange students arrived at the academy. A young Finari, fresh from orientation, spotted Danny sitting in the commons area laughing with Rolly, Sun, and Bree. The young Finari nudged a passing classmate. Who is the human? The classmate, a Drothi who had been in Galani's class, looked over. He watched Danny for a moment, saw the scars on his hands, and the easy way he sat among species that towered over him, and smiled. That is someone you want on your team, he said, when things go wrong. The young Finari looked confused. Why? What can human do? The Drothi kept walking. Everything, he said. Just enough of everything.